From our studios in Abu Dhabi and Los Angeles, this is Green Tag Theme Park in 30, an insider's take on the top theme park news each week. I'm Philip, and I'm here with my co-host, Scott Swenson of Scott Swenson Creative Development. And today I thought we'd start off with some signals that we're seeing from IAAPA's strategic plan. So to give a little bit of context, IAAPA had their annual board meeting, and in it, they discussed some of their strategic planning and where they think they should set their priorities for. And there's a big post about that we'll link to the show notes. But I think the most interesting things, two things I thought were the most interesting, was safety and sustainability. The president announced a 5-year strategic safety plan that sets the direction and how to develop the association's role and offering in this area. So they kind of laid out that they were going to make a safety plan. It's like, we're going to make a 5-year safety plan that will include how we should talk about safety because it's important. And I'm like, yeah, that's important. And on the sustainability, they noted that in a recent survey, 71% of members indicated that sustainability is extremely, very important to their organization. And they created a subcommittee to investigate a possible sustainability standard for board review by this November. So I actually think these two things were hidden in there, but they echo big trends we've seen. How many times have we talked about safety? Safety at the Six Flags, shutting down events, safety at theme park rides, all the deaths. I mean, safety is a big trend. And equally, sustainability, we've talked about the importance of sustainability, but we don't really see it coming up that often. It's one of those weird things. And it's also really interesting to me that they're thinking of making a standard, because I feel like that could turn maybe like unintentionally political, as in like if IAAPA is developing a safety standard and they need to get everybody, a sustainability standard, I think getting everybody on board with that should be easy. But, I'm not sure. I'm not sure why we don't talk more about sustainability. So it was so interesting to see them say 71%. And I was like, yes, I agree. And yet no one's talking about this. What do you think, Scott?
Well, I think that, let me start with the sustainability thing first, because that's something that I've noticed, again, from this side of the world. The parks that I have been to here, and even retail establishments, there are, first of all, you can't go grocery shopping without buying a bag. There is no such thing as a free plastic bag. So you either take your own or you purchase one. So it is something that is just standard operating procedure here in Abu Dhabi. And as far as parks go, when it comes to parks and sustainability, I have learned how to eat with a paper spoon as opposed to a plastic one. So when it comes to that kind of sustainability, that is something that I think may be sparked by, that 71% may be sparked by the expansion here in the Middle East of parks and attractions. I don't know whether the same is true in Asia, but I do know that I know from direct experience that it is definitely true here. There is very, very little plastic waste here at parks in the UAE. And so I'm guessing, and this is just conjecture, I don't know, but I'm guessing that may have sparked IAAPA to say, well, gosh, we should probably look at this, worldwide. Because when when you're in the States, you forget that IAAPA, the first letter of IAAPA is international. Yep. So you have to take into consideration that it's not just Orlando and California and a few other parks in the States. Yeah. That's not it. It looks at the world as a whole. And as things continue to grow in Abu Dhabi, in the Emirates in general, as well as in Saudi and other parts of the world, the United States is going to be a smaller and smaller percentage of the IAAPA membership.
Yeah.
And if the other parks are already looking at sustainability, it makes total sense. I'd love to see, honestly, out of that 71%, I'd love to see what the percentage is just in the U.S.
Broken down by sector. What do you think about them looking at a sustainability standard? Because, I, for one, I'm like, yes, thank goodness. But at the same time, I feel like it kind of reminds me of us over here being like, we need a privacy standard or like a tech standard or regulation. I think that I agree with you in my travels and whatnot. I do see overall the tourist destinations embracing sustainability in a public and private way. It's very trending, because there's the public things you mentioned, but there's also the more private things like putting up the solar farms and whatnot. And like Disney used to talk about all that. It's like we don't talk about that at all really here in the U.S. And I think it's because it's become a political topic, and I think that same kind of shadow might follow any sort of kind of industry standard that they try to put out there, because then effectively, you're having IAAPA potentially certifying or at least giving standards by which a governing body could certify or decertify attractions as to whether or not they are following sustainability practices.
Right. Well, I think that the reason, because so in my mind, I'm looking at this going, wow, finally?
I mean, that's what I'm thinking too, but also,
but let's take a half step back. Other than the political, I agree with you on the political ramifications of what this could cause. Keep in mind, IAAPA is not a governmental body, and when they say things like sustainability standard, that is not regulatory.
Yeah.
That is a standard by which its members should strive to achieve.
Yes, but we know it could have regulatory implications just because we know how it works, and some bodies may take IAAPA's standard and use it.
Conceivably, yes. But again, IAAPA represents an international point of view versus a local point of view. And I think part of the reason that it's taken so long for sustainability to actually be regulated or standardized or whatever is the cost.
Yeah.
Being sustainable now has become more affordable. And it's not, it used to be that, plastic cups were significantly cheaper than biodegradable paper. But that's not true anymore. The delta between the two has closed significantly. So now, without being elitist, IAAPA can come in and say, here are the standards, here are the sustainability standards, because they're more cost effective. Mm-hmm. You can say, FEC, you have to hit these standards. And they're like, I can't afford to hit those standards. I can't afford to buy the biodegradable organic paper to wrap my hot dogs. I've still got to put them in styrofoam clamshells, but now the prices have the delta on the prices have come together a little bit more, so they can be a little bit more, they've made it profitable to be sustainable.
Yeah.
And I think that is, I've said it for years. The only way we're going to get any form of sustainability is, or even responsibility for the environment, is to make it financially viable and financially beneficial to the organization. Because these are companies. This is not a hobby. These are companies who are out there to make money. And I think that's a perfect segue into safety. Yeah. We all know that the most expensive thing that can happen to a theme park is an accident. And not just from what it's going to cost them in lawsuits and, lost attendance because of bad press. And then, of course, the cost to repair whatever it was that caused the accident in the first place. And if it's a roller coaster, obviously, we've seen attractions. We've seen attractions shut down and be torn down after sitting dormant after accidents. We've seen that happen in our past. Mm-hmm. So I think I don't want to sound like I'm that guy who's always talking about money, but the truth of the matter is this is a business. Yeah. And if you can ethically run a business in a way that is profitable for you, then that just makes all the sense in the world. Safety is part of that.
Just looking at the examples that we've seen recently, like look at Glenwood Caverns. They had to shut down that ride for a whole year plus, right? And then pay to retheme the entire thing in order to try and reopen it again to keep that asset at least somewhat usable. And then, of course, the last thing Six Flags wants to do after their CEO is talking about how important Halloween is have to shut down their Halloween events because they can't keep a control on the crowds. I mean, you're right about them. I mean, these are huge financial implications. And, again, though, I kind of feel like this problem almost is a little bit worse in the US. And that could be my US centric view of things. But I scan headlines from all over the world every week for this. And I do not see nearly as many safety incidents coming from other countries. Maybe they're just not reported.
And I get and again, you're the data guy, Philip. You look at this stuff in far greater detail than I. From what I've seen, is that based on is that based on per capita? I mean, is it based on the attendance of the park?
That's true.
Because
That's a good point.
you know, I look at parks here, and I see that there is significantly lower attendance, but I see that there are significantly more children climbing on rocks. You know,
Yeah.
it's a unique thing culturally here, and it's because there are so many different cultures in the UAE that are all coming together to enjoy all of the things on Yas Island, for example.
Yeah.
So you've got a bunch of different cultures and a bunch of different ways of raising children, all coming together, and you see it's like herding cats. You see a mishmash of trying to figure out what is appropriate as far as safety standards and what can you mandate and what can you not.
Yeah.
So I agree with you, though. It does appear that there are more safety issues in the U.S. It may also be another factor that may play into that is government involvement.
Yeah.
I mean, here in the UAE, the government is very much involved in the development of theme parks and leisure activities. So, in fact, there's an entire wing of the government that does nothing but that. So, you know, it makes sense that if you're a little bit more Wild West still, like the U.S., and especially in certain markets,
Mm-hmm.
that there may be more injury because there's not as much government oversight. Now, I'm not saying there should be more or less government oversight, so please do not write comments or letters or whatever. All I'm saying is this may be the reason for it.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah. Well, the other thing that IAAPA has going on, and this is separate from the board meeting, but the other thing that IAAPA kind of put out a statement about is from their public affairs department. And, you know, because we're kind of winding down and a lot of the sessions are winding down right now. And so they kind of issued a recap of what's going on. And the things I thought was most interesting was that, again, underlining that the recruitment and retention and staffing challenges are just kind of also reflected in legislation as, of course, you know. And they talked about how 47 of the bills that they are tracking deal with employee leave and that type of, in that vein, which is, again, you know, seeing the data, we're talking about that. That's why we talked about it so much. They also talked about how workforce recruitment and retention challenges continue to be the number one issue impacting IAAPA members. For that reason, we are pleased states such as Ohio, Iowa, and Utah are considering bills that would allow workers under the age of 18 to work more hours. Connecticut is weighing attractions-specific legislation that would allow workers 14 and older to work non-hazardous jobs.
Wow.
Yeah. Indeed.
I will be honest. This is the first I've heard this, so I'm a little taken aback by that. I don't. Wow. I have to formulate how I feel about that.
That's exactly what I thought when I first read it. I mean, we talked a lot. Like, we've talked so much around this about the topic of how do we, you know, what type of compensation can you do? Can you rethink? How do we rethink the role and the compensation to make it attractive for people? And, you know, you always saying, Scott, how it's not about the money, it's really about the larger things. And I think what struck me about this is like, oh, well, this is one way around it, basically, where they're like, well, we'll just bring in younger and younger team members. And then, you know, for them, then it becomes their first job or their internship or they're, you know, getting their feet. I mean, it becomes like, that becomes more of what it's about. But I'm not sure, because I was just thinking, this happened to me this week twice. We were at Disney, and I heard comments twice about how the cast members were too young and inexperienced. Like, they just didn't know, you know, like no social skills, don't know what they're just like kind of just like so I'm a little bit like, I mean, I'm just like, well, I mean, like 14-year-olds running, you know, guest service. I'm not sure about, I don't know. I don't know how I feel about this. I don't know.
Yeah, I wow. So this is, you know, you always hear me talk about how everything is cyclical and the pendulum swings back and forth. I never thought child labor was going to be something that would swing back.
I know. It's like, I was like, well, this is one way, I guess, to fix it. I don't know. I guess. I mean, look at haunted houses, right?
Yeah. If you can't sustain the labor pool that you have, expand the pool. I mean, I do understand the methodology here. Oh boy. Now I will say, in just kind of talking this through, and I may come back later and listen to this and go, oh my God, Scott, what did you say? Why did you say that?
It'll live on the internet forever.
I will say, I know, I know. Trust me, I've put my foot in my mouth so many times on the internet. It's just habit. So, but at this moment, as of this particular recording date, I look at this and I think, well, on the one hand, 14-year-olds have experienced significantly more of the world than they did when I was 14, mainly because they have access to, via technology, they have access to so many more things. And is it necessarily a bad thing to train a 14-year-old to have better interpersonal skills, to have better ways of communicating that don't involve a screen and thumb typing? So that may be a positive thing here. It's clearly, though, that necessity is the mother of invention. But at the same time, I think it's interesting that 47% of the bills that IAAPA tracks deal with employee leave.
Yeah.
So it's like we need to find more people.
If you could bring your 14-year-old to work, that would solve the leave.
There you go. Bring your 14-year-old to work day.
They can work with you. I can't.
Yes, exactly. That is truly child labor law issues. But the idea here is, wow. So I will tell you here in the UAE,
that's basically middle school. Like 14 is the upper end of middle school. So I'm just like, so you could. I mean, I guess they're thinking like summer break or summer vacation or weekends, or I mean, I don't know. Anyway, keep on with your thought.
No, that's fine. I mean, to be completely honest, I started working when I was 13.
Yeah.
So and now I was self-employed at the time, but I started working and I started performing as a magician. So I was doing, birthday parties and special events and that kind of thing. So I don't see that as I don't see the age as that much of an issue yet. I don't know, but like, for example, here in the UAE, they have a very different work approach. Now they also have a very different work ethic, and there's also a lot of different levels of society here in the UAE. Mm-hmm. But for the most part, the parks here are on a 6-day work week and up to 10 hours per day. Yeah. And now that's a little bit unique right now because we're in Ramadan, which means that based on government issue, this is not slightly based on are you observant or are you not, but the workday then goes down during Ramadan. The workday goes down to either 6 hours if you are observant and 7 hours if you are not. And there are very few, other than religious centric, there are very few holidays, government paid holidays throughout the year, and that's left up to the individual company in many cases. So the ones that are run by United States companies, for example, or operated by United States companies, usually take those kinds of holidays or offer those kinds of holidays off. But as we all know, working in theme park, I've worked more holidays than I haven't.
Yeah.
So, but when it comes to leave, that's a bit more of a challenge. It's tricky. Yeah. It's tricky. So we'll see. People want to work. We need more jobs, and yet the majority of the things that they're dealing with are ways to get out of work. Now, is that so that they can maintain employees and don't have to retrain them? That's a strong possibility. If they say, I need to take a leave because I have a family issue that I need to deal with for a month. And if they say no, well, then they lose that person because they're going to take the family thing anyway. Yeah. So they lose that person, and then they have to retrain, refind, rehire somebody else to replace them. So I guess, being a little bit more lenient with the leave mentality could benefit in the long run. But the whole age thing is still kind of rattling my brain. I don't know if there's anything wrong with it.
They're not,
I don't know whether there's anything wrong with it.
Again, this is just legislation that IAAPA is tracking. It's not like it's set in stone, right? I mean, how much stuff always comes up all the time and then never gets up. So it'll be interesting to watch. But I guess speaking of watching thing, I'm not sure. So Time interviewed Bob Iger, and it was fine. There was two things I thought were interesting. One, of course, was he was of course, asked about the whole thing with Florida again, as usual, and he gave, I think, a more toned down response versus when he talked to the shareholders. But he did kind of again reiterate his commitment to Florida and reiterate how much kind of reiterate like how important they are for it and whatnot, and kind of like that whole thing. So that's fine. But the more interesting part I thought was about he was asked about basically ESPN and what to do with that and the whole betting thing, and he said, quote, I was probably on the more conservative side about this for a long time, but I've changed because I think the acceptance of sports betting has grown significantly, and my desire is to see that the company continues to serve its customers well without us really, I think, distancing ourselves from values because we're not actually causing the bets to be made. We're just enabling people to link to companies that do that. So, I mean, it was interesting because I did kind of think that they were going to spin off ESPN or somehow it was going to like kind of move into a different sphere because again, it kind of doesn't fit as much with the arc of how they're rearranging the company. But it was interesting for him to be like, well, we're just pointing them to places where they can make bets. We're not like encouraging the bets. Because online betting, of course, is taken for the context for listeners. Online betting has taken off more and more as kind of regulations change about it, and it's become more accessible to people. So this is a trend that we're seeing online betting continue, and I'm sure that we will continue to see it even more because follow the money, of course. So it's I'm sure it's going to get worse.
Yeah, so in true Scott style, I'm going to tell a little story. When I was younger, my parents loved to go to the racetrack, to the horse racetrack. When I was growing up, I was too young to bet, so my dad would become the house and I would bet significantly smaller amounts of money. And my dad would become basically the window. I'd go to my dad and I'd say, I want to bet 50 cents on this one to place. And he would use the real odds to either pay me back or not, which was all just really fun and teaching me how to bet at a horse racetrack. So I see nothing wrong. I don't have that much of a moral issue with betting on sports. I really don't. I do understand that for some people it becomes a very serious problem, and that is a completely different issue because there's pretty much anything you can mention that people can develop a serious addiction to, and I don't want to make light of that in any way, shape, or form. So as far as the moral ramifications of betting, personally, I don't have a strong aversion to that. What I do think is interesting is the choice of we're not forcing people to make the bets. We're just showing them how to do it. We're not really forcing the children to smoke cigarettes. We're just leaving them on the table. That's a little, and I know what he was trying to say. But the phraseology just sounds a little suspicious to me. I don't know. But as he said, it's he started out on the more conservative side and probably followed the same line of thought that I did, and that is, well, betting itself is not a horrible thing. Yeah. Those who become addicted to it, that becomes another very serious issue. And when the phrase is used, we're just enabling people to link to companies that do that. Does that make you guilty by association? I don't know. I'll leave that up to each of you as listeners.
Yeah. But I think the reason I wanted to include it is that that's exactly it. It kind of, again, harkens back to this theme we've been tracking for a while about how the line, between like the moral actions and perceptions or whatnot of the company, like it used to be completely divorced and now it's getting closer to. I mean, I was, one might have been surprised that a Time interview asked about this. I guess that's my point, right? Is the whole, that like this whole where you stand and what you're doing and how your reflections as a company are perceived is becoming more important, and being able to walk that, because I was a little surprised, honestly, that like a Time piece would, I mean, this is more, I would expect that question from like the Financial Times or like, the Harvard Business Journal or, something that's a little bit more like for business people. This is kind of like the general public wants to know if you think allowing sports betting is moral. And I'm like, what? that is not something that we used to have to think about when it came to that thing, But yeah, just so interesting. They're asking about these two things, the Florida thing and this. And I was like, well, that's...
Well, and we've talked about in great length the fact that more and more people are as concerned about the moral stance of a company
Yep.
as they are about the actual attraction itself.
Yeah.
There are companies, even as an old guy, there are companies that I don't give my money to because I don't agree with their moral standings. Their product may be great, but if I don't agree with their stance, I'm not going to support them with my money.
Yep.
And I think that is, again, true
It's
here.
a growing trend.
Yeah. And I do just want to go back because we just, I know we've talked about it a lot, but since I come back to Florida in about 6 weeks, I want to I want to just talk just briefly about the Florida thing with Disney and the governor and all that. So I think it's interesting that you say he softened his stance a little bit, and I think it's because it's a different audience.
Yeah.
With stockholders, you have to be the strong leader. You have to be but from what I've seen, and again, you've delved into this deeper, from what I've seen, he didn't change the message.
No.
He just changed the packaging.
Yeah. Yeah. He basically reinforcing the message that we are for Florida. Like, we are here for Florida to help Florida. We have been instrumental in building Florida. We plan to remain here. We plan to invest more, and we plan to support the people and the businesses and the economy, and that was the message. And he kind of was like, I'm open to having conversations with any legislators because I believe, that legislators have a role in the same thing, and we both want the same thing, which is success of Florida, blah, blah. So it really was keeping on the message of like, we're here for Florida. Like, we're not like, so he just didn't say that DeSantis was anti-Florida, which is what he had said in the stockholder meeting. So
correct. Well, and there are, without getting political, there are people who feel that that DeSantis is anti-Florida, and there are people who feel that he is not. That is not for this show.
Yeah.
But the thing is, the majority of people in the industry, obviously, are looking at this very, very carefully to see how much power. We were just talking about governmental, I won't say interference, but governmental regulation in the theme park industry, and this, to me, is taking it to an unbelievably strong or unbelievably over the top level that I don't think anybody experienced. And we'll see how Disney deals with it. It sounds like Disney's a storyteller.
Yes.
Disney, as a company,
yes,
they are a storyteller, and they are telling a very powerful story. Now, let's hope that DeSantis follows the story.
I just think, oh God, I just think it was. I just can't. That plug that was in there. Oh, grief. I was gonna say, I just think, though, it's so powerful because they can back it up. I think, to me, that's like the big difference. Is like, it's like, here's what we've done. Here's what we're going to do. Here's what we continue to do.
Well, and what I think is really interesting is it's past the point of defending why Reedy Creek existed.
Yep.
It's not looking backwards.
Yep.
It's looking forward.
Yeah.
We are here for Florida. We help build Florida.
Yep.
We will continue to reinvest in Florida.
It's a masterstroke. Their framing of this narrative is very good, and it's hard to argue with it. I mean, it really is. I feel like it doesn't matter where you fall on the spectrum. I'm not sure you can really, I think everybody in that area at least agrees, and then I think that's the. So,
and it's interesting, for those of you who have listened to the show for a long period of time or watched the show for a long period of time, that Philip and I are not always on Disney's side.
Yeah.
But in this particular case, we have to give credit where credit is due because they are really, in my opinion, based on what I'm seeing, they are handling this incredibly well. And I hope they continue to move forward in this direction because as a Floridian, if they go away, it's going to change my quality of life.
Yeah.
And I do not want that to happen. I say that very selfishly, and I just want to be transparent about how selfish that is.
There is something I want to mention right at the end of the show here, just while we're on this topic that's gotten brought up. So we did have a few listeners that commented about the last episode about it, and they basically mentioned that the thing that we left out about it was the argument that companies have First Amendment rights, basically. and telling a company what they can and can't do is kind of like in that way is a violation of First Amendment rights, which companies have. Mm-hmm. And we didn't really bring that up, but that argument has been brought up by other people. The reason we didn't bring it up was just because Disney didn't argue that yet.
Right.
They might. I mean, it might come out in the future with Supreme Courts or appeals or whatever, but we kind of were focused on what was Disney saying. Like, what are the facts and what did Disney say and what did DeSantis say in public comment? We weren't talking about so I just want to acknowledge that like that is a theory that's rolling out there and whatnot. And I'm not a legal expert, so we don't want to talk, but I just want to acknowledge that. But I also wanted to give two reminders, right our time to give two reminders. We have switched over to a separate YouTube channel. So if you were subscribed to everyone, please move over to this new channel. And we are also, again, changing the feeds around. We're changing the feeds around. So we'll continue to keep Green Tag as a dedicated feed. If you happen to be listening on the network feed, move over and subscribe to Green Tagged. And if you were looking at our videos on the network, you can go to the Green Tagged YouTube channel in any places, or just go to greentagshow.com. Actually has everything for you. So the easiest thing to do is just go to Green Tag Show and you can find the YouTube, the videos, and the links to subscribe to the audio, whatever you prefer.
Yeah. So please follow us, because without you, it's just the two of us talking on camera. So and again, thank you so much for those of you who did mention the things that we left out. Please continue to do that. We love it when we get feedback, both positive and constructive. Mm-hmm. I won't say negative, both positive and constructive from our listeners, because it really, really helps us. And the only way we can get that feedback is if you continue to listen, but not now because the show's over. So we will see you next week here on Green Tag Theme Park in 30.